Naomi Pierce never liked walking into Heritage First Bank. Even the glass doors felt heavy, like they were designed to remind folks who didn't belong that this wasn't their space. Maple Ford, Georgia, was the kind of place where people still said our families go back generations here, and if yours didn't, well, you knew it the minute you set foot in line. It was late afternoon on a Tuesday, and Naomi came straight from her shift at the cafeteria. Her denim jacket smelled faintly of grease, and bleached 12 hours of feeding other people's kids left its mark. She didn't have time to change. Didn't have energy either. But today mattered. She was holding on to her grandmother's dream. Miss Loretta Pierce, God rest her soul, had run the best soul food joint in the county, a place where collard greens simmered all day, and cornbread came out golden with just the right crisp on the edge. Folks still stopped Naomi in the grocery store and said, "Your grandma's peach cobbler?" Nothing like it. When Loretta passed, the recipes passed down 2 handwritten cards smudged with grease, corners bent from years of use. Naomi wanted to put those recipes on wheels, a food truck that could park outside football games and festivals, bring back what the community missed. But dreams need money. And money meant banks. Inside Heritage First, the fluorescent lights buzzed like tired bees. The counter smelled of lemon disinfectant. Behind it stood Rick Dalton, the branch manager, in his pressed navy suit and tie knotted just right. He was the kind of man who smiled at you without letting his eyes agree. Naomi approached the counter with her folder. Everything neat: tax returns, vendor letters, her newly repaired credit score, proof of a business plan she'd worked on for months. She rehearsed what to say in her head, clear, professional, no rambling. "Good afternoon," she said, setting the folder down. "I'm here to talk about applying for a microloan. I'd like to start a food truck business in my grandmother's name. I have all the documentation you'll need." Rick tapped the folder with 2 fingers, not even glancing inside. "Forms, Ms. Pierce?" He glanced at her ID as if her name was foreign. "Our loan approvals are very competitive. Legacy clients are usually prioritized. Legacy clients. Maple Ford talk for old families with old money." Naomi felt her stomach knot, but she smiled anyway. "I understand. Still, I'd appreciate your review." Before Rick could answer, the glass doors swung open behind her. In walked Mr. Whitcomb, golf shirt still tucked from his morning round. Rick's face lit up. "Good to see you again, Mr. Whitcomb. Water? How's the course this week?" Naomi stood there, invisible, while Rick fetched a chilled bottle from a mini-fridge she hadn't even noticed behind the desk. He handed it over like they were old fraternity brothers. When he turned back to her, the smile vanished. "We'll need to check your file," he said flatly. "Might take some time." Naomi pressed her lips together. She could feel eyes on her from the waiting chairs, people watching to see how she'd react. She remembered her mama's voice. "Keep your cool, document everything, dignity is yours to guard." So she asked evenly, "You're saying my paperwork is lost between here and your printer?" Rick blinked slowly, the way people do when they think they've already won. "It happens." Naomi slipped her phone into her pocket before he could see the lock screen flash. "Field exam, HFB 8:30 a.m. tomorrow." A calendar reminder she'd set weeks ago, back when her office assigned her the case. She smiled, but not the polite kind. The kind that said, "Go ahead, underestimate me, please do." The rest of the transaction was quick. Rick gave her a generic brochure, told her someone would be in touch, and called next before she even turned around. Naomi walked out into the Georgia heat with the folder still full in her hands. The air smelled like asphalt and honeysuckle. Her heart beat fast, not from shame, but from the fire she'd been forced to swallow. She replayed every word, every pause. Legacy clients, lost paperwork. It happens. She didn't shout. She didn't storm out. She just tucked the memory away like a receipt. Because tomorrow morning, Naomi Pierce wasn't coming back as the woman in the denim jacket smelling of fryer oil. She was coming back in a blazer with a badge, and this time, she wouldn't be the one answering questions. The sun was already dipping low by the time Naomi pulled her little Corolla into the driveway. The siding on her house needed painting. The porch light flickered when it felt like it, but inside, that was her sanctuary. The place still smelled faintly of cinnamon and furniture polish from the weekend, when her sister Janelle had brought sweet rolls over for the kids. As soon as Naomi stepped through the door, her son Micah came barreling down the hallway. "Mama!" He wrapped his thin arms around her waist, face buried in her jacket. At 16, he was already taller than her, but he still hugged like a little boy when the day got heavy. "You eat yet?" Naomi asked, smoothing his curls. "Pizza rolls," Micah admitted, sheepish. Naomi chuckled. "Better than nothing. I'll fix something proper later." Her daughter, 12-year-old Aaliyah, peeked around the corner with a homework sheet in hand. "Math's impossible," she groaned. "Nothing's impossible," Naomi said automatically, though she knew full well that math after a 12-hour shift could feel exactly that. She kissed her daughter's forehead and promised to look it over after dinner. By the time the kids settled into their routines, Micah glued to basketball highlights, Aaliyah sprawled at the kitchen table with pencils everywhere. Naomi finally sat down. She opened her laptop on the dining table, the same spot where bills were stacked and permission slips piled up. But tonight, the screen wasn't for family finances. It was for work. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's secure portal blinked to life, her login credentials rolling through the encryption like gears turning in a lock. Case number 22-418. Heritage First Bank, Mapleford Branch. Status: scheduled surprise exam. Naomi leaned back in her chair. The irony hit hard. Just that afternoon, she had been brushed off like she was nobody. And tomorrow morning, she'd walk in as the senior investigator in charge of evaluating that same branch's lending practices. Her phone buzzed. A message from Janelle. "How'd it go at the bank?" Naomi stared at the screen a long moment before typing back. "Same old story. But it ain't over." Almost instantly, Janelle called. "Girl, don't tell me they gave you the runaround again?" Naomi sighed. "Lost my paperwork before even looking at it. Told me approvals are competitive while handing water bottles to Mr. Whitcomb like he owns the place." Janelle let out a low whistle. "They don't even try to hide it anymore." "Nope," Naomi said, rubbing her temples. "But tomorrow's different." "You mean your assignment?" Janelle's voice sharpened. "Yeah, same branch." There was silence on the line. Then Janelle whispered, "Lord have mercy. So what you gonna do? You can't pretend you weren't just in there as a customer." Naomi's jaw tightened. "I already logged a potential conflict with Andre. By the book. I'm not hiding nothing. If they want me off, they'll tell me." Janelle snorted. "If you ask me, you're exactly the one who needs to be there. They don't treat us fair until somebody with power calls it out." Naomi closed her eyes, hearing her grandmother's voice layered over her sister's. "Baby, you can't change a system by whispering at it. You gotta bring receipts." After hanging up, Naomi opened her files. Charts of loan approvals by zip code stared back at her. Mapleford's minority applicants were denied nearly twice as often as white applicants with the same credit scores. The numbers didn't lie. But numbers alone never carried the sting of a manager's smile that said, "Not for you." Her cursor hovered over the recusal option in the system. If she clicked it, another examiner would take the case. No one could accuse her of bias. safe, clean. But then she thought about Micah behind the wheel someday, pulled over in a neighborhood where his face made him a suspect. She thought about Aliyah applying for her first job, only to be told she wasn't the right fit. She thought about her grandmother standing over a hot stove, serving the same sheriff's deputies who wouldn't let her sit at the counter in town back in her day. Naomi clicked proceed per protocol. Then she typed a note to her supervisor, Andre Morales. Potential conflict disclosed. Will maintain objectivity, requesting live oversight during exam for transparency. Andre replied in less than 5 minutes. Understood. Trust you. You've got this. Naomi exhaled. That was that. Later that night, when the kids were in bed and the house was finally quiet, she pulled out her grandmother's recipe cards. The ink had faded, and the paper smelled faintly of nutmeg and grease. She ran her fingers over the words, remembering how Loretta used to hum while cooking, shoulders swaying to Al Green on the radio. "I'll get it back, Grandma," Naomi whispered. "One way or another." Before turning in, Naomi stood in front of the bathroom mirror. She saw the faint lines around her eyes, the tiredness of too many doubles, the quiet steel in her gaze. People looked at her and saw a single mom in a denim jacket. Tomorrow, they'd see something else. She set out her blazer, pressed slacks, and sensible heels. She tucked her badge into her bag, right beside the folder Rick Dalton had refused to open. Then she climbed into bed, heart racing but steady. Sleep didn't come easy. Memories tugged at her the first time a landlord told her an apartment was already taken when she showed up in person. The look on her old supervisor's face when she outscored everyone on the licensing exam. The way people always seemed surprised when she spoke in full sentences like her education was a party trick. But instead of letting the bitterness win, Naomi held on to a different memory, her grandmother's words. Never meet their smallness with your smallness. Meet it with proof. And baby, keep your receipts. By the time dawn broke, Naomi was ready. She braided her hair neat, buttoned her blazer, and kissed her children goodbye. "Be good today," she told them. "Mama's got work to do." The drive to Heritage First Bank felt different that morning. Same cracked roads, same Waffle House sign flashing half its letters, same magnolia trees lining Maple Street. But Naomi's hands were steady on the wheel, her eyes clear. She wasn't going back as the woman who stood waiting in line yesterday. She was going back as the woman holding the flashlight this system didn't want shined in its corners. And this time, no smile, no missing paperwork, no polite excuse would shut the door. The morning air was crisp, the kind that made the sky look too blue to be real. Naomi parked 2 blocks away from Heritage First, not because she had to, but because she wanted a quiet walk to center herself. Each step across the cracked sidewalk felt deliberate, like she was placing down markers. Yesterday you doubted me. Today, I decide what matters here. She wasn't alone this time. 2 examiners from her team, Marcus Lee and Tasha Green, flanked her. Both younger, both sharp. Marcus carried the standard-issue black bag with forms and laptops. Tasha balanced her iPad against a clipboard stacked with checklists. Naomi adjusted the strap of her blazer and pulled her badge from her purse. She didn't flash it like a weapon. She just held it in her hand, visible, the way a mechanic holds a wrench before lifting the hood. This was her tool, her proof. The bank lobby buzzed with its usual hum. Printers whirring, phones ringing, the smell of burnt coffee drifting from a pot that should have been changed an hour ago. Customers sat in plastic chairs, leafing through outdated magazines. Rick Dalton stood at the counter, giving orders to a young teller who nodded nervously. He looked up, saw Naomi, and for a heartbeat, his face didn't change. Then recognition hit. The flicker in his eyes was brief, but real, like a boxer taking a punch he didn't see coming. "Good morning?" Naomi said evenly. She raised her badge. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We're here to conduct a scheduled compliance exam. The lobby went quiet. Marcus and Tasha began handing out notice forms to staff, while Naomi locked eyes with Rick. His jaw tightened. Of course, he said after a beat too long. Why don't we step into my office? Inside the cramped glass-walled office, Rick tried for charm. Miss Pierce, wasn't it? I believe we spoke yesterday. Naomi sat across from him, back straight, folder on the table. We did, she said, as a customer. Today, I'm here in my capacity as lead examiner. For the record, that prior interaction has been disclosed to my supervisors and will not affect the scope of this review. Understood? Rick swallowed. Understood. Naomi turned to Tasha. Let's begin with loan tapes and underwriting criteria for the past 3 years. All approvals, denials, and exception files. Rick blinked. That's a significant volume. That's why we're here, Naomi replied calmly. Please provide digital and hard copy, unaltered. While Marcus and Tasha began logging what staff handed over, Naomi scanned the room. One teller, young, Latina, maybe 21, kept glancing her way, then quickly back at her screen. Something about her posture spoke of tension, like she was holding a truth too heavy. When Naomi passed her desk later, the teller slipped a sticky note under a stack of receipts. Naomi palmed it without breaking stride. Back in the conference room, she unfolded it. Check Exception Log Folder 3. Her pulse quickened. Exceptions were where banks often hid discriminatory practices. Denials dressed as incomplete documentation, approvals for legacy clients that bent every rule. Sure enough, in Folder 3, Naomi found patterns. White applicants with lower credit scores approved through relationship exceptions. Black and Latino applicants denied for documentation missing even when files were complete. Marcus, she said quietly, flag every case coded under documentation incomplete in the last 18 months. He nodded, fingers flying across his laptop. Meanwhile, Rick hovered. We take compliance very seriously, he said, voice tight. I'm sure you'll find everything in order. Naomi didn't answer. She let the silence hang, the weight of evidence speaking louder than his words. By mid-morning, the exam had shifted tone. What began as routine became surgical. Tasha pulled up denial letters. Marcus cross-checked them against credit scores. Disparities piled up like bricks. Then came the moment Naomi had half expected, half dreaded. Rick leaned across the table, lowering his voice. Look, Ms. Pierce, Naomi, yesterday, whatever misunderstanding occurred, I regret if you felt dismissed. But dragging this out won't help anyone? Maybe we can Naomi cut him off with a raised hand. This is not personal. This is procedure. The data stands on its own. The door opened. The young teller, the one who slipped the note, stepped inside, clutching a folder. Her name tag read, Sophia Alvarez. She looked nervous, but her voice was steady. Ms. Pierce? She said, eyes darting toward Rick. There's something you should see. Rick shot up. Sophia, that's not. Naomi gestured for her to continue. Sophia laid the folder on the table. Inside were internal emails between Rick and another manager. Phrases like, fit our culture and legacy families only repeated over and over, shorthand for who got approved. One message even bragged, screening out time wasters before they waste our pipeline. Naomi felt her throat tighten not with anger, but with the confirmation of what she'd suspected for years. She looked at Sophia. Thank you. This will be documented. Are you willing to provide a statement? Sophia hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I'm tired of watching this happen. Rick turned red. This is outrageous. Those are private communications taken out of context. Naomi leaned forward, voice calm but cutting. Private doesn't mean lawful, and context is exactly what we'll provide. For the next 2 hours, the exam deepened. Naomi requested call recordings. She uncovered a denial letter dated yesterday, issued after she had already left the branch, claiming her own file lacked a key document she knew she'd handed over: a forged timing stamp. That was the smoking gun. By noon, the branch staff were whispering, the lobby half empty, the atmosphere thick with dread. Rick kept pacing, wiping sweat from his forehead. His earlier confidence had drained into something brittle. Naomi gathered her team. "We'll expand the scope," she said. "Andre has authorized it. Every denial, every exception, every coaching script." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A text from Andre. "You're doing fine. Follow the data. We'll back you." Naomi exhaled. She looked at Rick one last time. Yesterday, he'd seen a woman in a denim jacket, tired from a double shift. Today, he was watching the same woman unravel his career with nothing but her calm voice, her badge, and the receipts he never thought she'd hold. For the first time all morning, Naomi allowed herself a small, private smile. Not gloating, just recognition. The kind that said, "This is what happens when you bet against the wrong person." And in that glass office, under the same humming fluorescent lights, the power shifted. By the time the lunch hour passed, Heritage First no longer felt like a bank. It felt like a courtroom where the walls themselves were witnesses. The hum of printers and the ding of teller drawers were drowned out by the shuffle of files, the soft clicks of laptops, and the sharp undercurrent of whispered conversations. Naomi had seen this before, institutions unraveling once sunlight hit their hidden corners. But it felt different here, in her own town, with people she passed in the grocery store. Sophia sat across the table now, more composed than when she first slipped that sticky note. She'd agreed to give a formal statement, her voice steady even as Rick hovered near the doorway, arms crossed so tight his knuckles went white. "They told us to slow down applications from certain neighborhoods," Sophia said, eyes flicking toward Naomi. "We were told to wait for more documentation, even when the files were complete. If I asked why, the answer was always, not a priority, not a fit." Naomi typed as she listened, capturing every word. Tasha cross-referenced each statement with loan files, while Marcus flagged statistical anomalies. The patterns lined up like dominoes falling. Rick finally snapped. "This is ridiculous. One teller's opinion doesn't prove discrimination. We serve everyone fairly." Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Mr. Dalton, the numbers tell a different story. The files confirm it. And now your staff corroborates it. This isn't one person's opinion. This is a system." Rick's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he looked smaller. Just then, the door to the lobby opened, and a familiar face stepped in. Pastor Lewis, from the First Missionary Baptist Church. Word had spread fast through Maple Ford. A few community members had already gathered outside, murmuring, holding phones. Now they began trickling in. Pastor Lewis cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I don't mean to intrude, but I heard what's happening. I just wanted to say our congregation's been denied 3 times for a building loan. Each time, they said incomplete paperwork. We had everything filed, everything." Naomi gestured to Marcus. "Please document this statement." Rick sputtered. "This is a private examination, not a public." Naomi cut him off with a calm glance. Transparency is not optional when public trust is at stake. Behind Pastor Lewis, others spoke up. A barber in his smock, a bakery owner with flour still dusting her apron. Each had their own story of being denied, delayed, dismissed, patterns repeating like echoes. The weight of their words filled the room. This wasn't just Naomi versus Rick anymore. It was Mapleford versus Heritage First. By mid-afternoon, Andre called in on speakerphone. His voice was clear, authoritative. Naomi, we've reviewed your live uploads. Effective immediately. Expand the scope of this exam to include regional oversight. Preserve all records. Nothing leaves that branch without documentation. Rick slumped in his chair. His tie was loose, his forehead shiny with sweat. You're ruining reputations over coincidences, he muttered. Naomi leaned forward. Coincidences don't stack into patterns this consistent. What we're uncovering isn't random. It's deliberate. Sophia looked down at her hands, then up again. There's more, she whispered. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thumb drive. These are coaching scripts they gave us. We were told not to save them, but I did. Marcus plugged it in. The screen filled with bullet points. If applicant mentions family business, ask for collateral. If applicant is first generation, flag as high risk. If applicant doesn't have community references, deny. Tasha read aloud, her voice flat with disbelief. If applicant doesn't look like our base demographic, escalate to manager. The silence after that line was heavy, broken only by the sound of Pastor Lewis whispering a prayer under his breath. Naomi looked around the room, at the examiners, at the teller who found her courage, at the townspeople who came forward. For years, they'd each been carrying fragments of truth. Today, those fragments formed a mirror too sharp to ignore. Rick pushed back from the table. You all are twisting this. Every bank has discretion. This is business, not discrimination. Naomi's eyes met his, calm, unyielding. Business doesn't explain why white applicants with lower credit scores were approved, while Black and Latino applicants with stronger files were denied. Business doesn't explain forged denial letters with false timestamps. Business doesn't explain coaching scripts that literally say what people should look like. Rick's mouth opened again, but nothing came out. By late afternoon, the community outside had doubled. Local reporters arrived, cameras at the ready. The story wasn't just data points anymore. It was faces, names, living testimonies. Naomi stood at the front of the branch conference room, gathering her notes. We will finalize today's findings and escalate them to regional headquarters. Further investigation will continue in collaboration with federal oversight. For now, this branch is under restricted operations. No new loans are to be issued until compliance is restored. Gasps rippled through the room. Some employees looked relieved, others panicked. Rick sat slumped, his earlier bravado gone. His voice cracked when he said, "You can't do this. Do you know who my father is?" "He's been on the bank's board for 20 years. Naomi's reply was quiet, almost gentle. Your father's name doesn't erase the truth in these files. Legacy doesn't excuse injustice. Outside, the crowd pressed closer to the glass. Word was out. Mapleford had just witnessed a crack in the wall of silence. As Naomi and her team packed up their files, Sophia whispered, "Thank you. I thought I'd lose my job. But watching you today, I think maybe we're gaining something bigger." Naomi smiled faintly. Courage spreads. You just lit a spark. When she stepped out into the fading sunlight, people cheered softly, not loud, not like a parade. More like relief. Like someone had finally said out loud what they'd been carrying for years. Naomi adjusted her blazer, held her head high, and thought of her grandmother's words. Never meet their smallness with your smallness. Meet it with proof. She had, and tomorrow, the reckoning would only grow. By the time most folks in Mapleford were breaking for lunch, the branch of Heritage First Bank didn't feel like a bank anymore. It felt like a pressure cooker where every whisper, every shuffle of paper, every nervous glance carried the weight of judgment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but no one was paying attention to them. All eyes were on Naomi and her team. Sofia Alvarez sat stiff-backed in her chair, the folder she'd brought now spread open across the table. Her hands trembled when she first began speaking, but her voice grew steadier with each sentence. "We were told not to deny outright," she explained, glancing quickly at Rick Dalton standing in the doorway. "We were told to stall, to ask for extra documents we didn't need, to flag certain neighborhoods as higher risk, even if the credit was clean. We were told if we made them wait long enough, most people would just give up." Naomi's pen scratched across her notepad. Tasha typed furiously. Marcus tagged files in their database. It wasn't just testimony, they had the numbers, the letters, and now the words from inside the system itself. Rick couldn't keep quiet any longer. He slammed his hand against the doorframe. "This is one person's interpretation. She's twisting our internal practices into something ugly." Naomi didn't flinch. She looked up, calm and level. "The data matches her words, and the files don't lie." That was when the first knock came on the glass lobby doors. Naomi turned to see Pastor Lewis, his broad shoulders framed against the sunlight outside. Behind him, 2 deacons and a handful of church members waited. He stepped inside when the guard let him through, hat in hand. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I heard word about what's happening here today. I think you should know, our church has been denied 3 times for a small building loan. Every time they told us, missing paperwork." We had the receipts in hand. Naomi nodded and gestured to Marcus. "Please document Pastor Lewis's statement." It was like opening a floodgate. One by one, townspeople began slipping into the branch. A barber still in his apron, smelling of talc and Clipper's oil. The bakery owner from down the street, flour dusting her sleeves. A young couple who'd tried to get a mortgage last spring. Each of them told the same kind of story. Long delays, vague denials, paperwork mysteriously lost. Rick's face turned crimson. "This is supposed to be a private examination." "You people have no right," Naomi cut him off, voice steady as stone. "Transparency is part of accountability. What happens here affects every person sitting in this lobby. Their voices matter." Andre Morales' voice crackled in over speakerphone just then. Naomi had looped him in earlier, and now his authority filled the room. "We've reviewed the preliminary evidence. Effective immediately, this exam expands to cover regional oversight. All records are to be preserved. No shredding, no alterations, no excuses." Rick staggered back into his chair, his bravado collapsing into a thin whine. "You're going to ruin this branch. Do you know who my father is? He's been on the board for 20 years. Naomi leaned forward. Her voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than any shout. "Your father's name doesn't erase what's on these pages. Legacy doesn't excuse injustice." The room went still. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. Sophia swallowed hard and spoke again, almost in a whisper. "There's something else." She reached into her bag and produced a thumb drive. "I wasn't supposed to keep this, but I couldn't throw it away. These are the coaching scripts they gave us." Marcus plugged it into his laptop, and the screen filled with bullet points. Tasha read them aloud, disbelief heavy in her voice. "If applicant mentions family business, demand collateral. If applicant is first generation, flag as high risk. If applicant doesn't have community references, deny. If applicant doesn't match our base demographic, escalate to manager." The words landed like hammer blows. The townspeople shifted uncomfortably, shaking their heads, murmuring under their breath. Pastor Lewis crossed his arms, eyes closed as if in prayer. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Mr. Dalton, do you want to explain how this language found its way into official training?" Rick sputtered. Those are taken out of context. It's standard discretion, that's all. Standard discretion doesn't forge denial letters after the fact, Naomi replied, sliding forward the letter dated with yesterday's timestamp her own denial. Standard discretion doesn't manufacture missing documents that applicants still hold in their hands. Rick's mouth opened, then shut again. He had no words left. Outside the glass, the crowd grew larger. Phones raised, reporters whispering into cameras. The town could see something was happening, something bigger than one woman and one loan. This was the first crack in a wall that had been holding back entire neighborhoods. Naomi gathered her notes, every line a nail in the coffin of Heritage First's excuses. She stood tall, blazer catching the afternoon light, and addressed the room. Effective immediately. This branch is under restricted operations. No new loans are to be issued until compliance is restored. Every file, every log, every communication will be reviewed. Gasps rippled across the staff. Some looked relieved, others terrified. Sophia looked like she could finally breathe. Rick dropped his gaze to the floor, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You can't do this to me." Naomi picked up her badge and closed her folder. "I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself." When she stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, the crowd greeted her with a quiet cheer. Not loud, not triumphant, just the sound of people realizing the silence was broken. For the first time in a long time, Maple Ford felt like the truth had found its way into daylight. Naomi adjusted her blazer, heart steady, her grandmother's voice echoing once more. Never meet their smallness with your smallness. Meet it with proof. And today, she had. 6 months later, the old gymnasium at Maple Ford's community center buzzed with a different kind of energy. Folding chairs lined the basketball court, filled with townspeople who once whispered about unfair loans and missing paperwork, but now came forward with hope. A banner stretched across the stage. Police Accountability and Banking Fairness Commission Community Forum. At the podium stood Naomi Pierce, no longer just a quiet woman running errands after hospital visits, no longer just a daughter holding on to her grandmother's recipes. She was the federal examiner who had pulled back the curtain, and now the chair of a community-led commission, making sure the curtain stayed open. She looked out at faces both familiar and new. Pastor Lewis with his church deacons, Sophia Alvarez seated beside her new role as compliance director, young couples holding folders of approved mortgage papers. Even Rick Dalton sat in the back, out of uniform, humbled and quieter than anyone remembered. Naomi cleared her throat. "When I was a little girl, my grandmother used to say, 'Dignity without teeth is just a smile they can ignore.' I never really understood that until I walked into Heritage First that morning and got told to wait, like my presence was an inconvenience. I thought about all the people before me who didn't have a badge, who didn't have a title to fall back on. Folks who were left with nothing but silence." The crowd nodded, murmurs of agreement moving like a wave. She continued, her voice steady. "What happened here in Maple Ford wasn't an accident. It wasn't about one file or one loan. It was a system that told people like us we weren't good enough, that we didn't belong in certain homes, certain neighborhoods, certain futures. And for too long, we believed that lie because we didn't have proof. Now we do. And proof changes everything." Her words weren't grandiose, they were plain, but they carried weight. Because everyone in the room knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to have doors closed for no reason other than who they were or where they came from. After the forum, Naomi slipped outside for air. The evening light painted Maple Ford in gold. Kids rode bikes down cracked sidewalks, and the smell of fried chicken wafted from the corner carryout. A small food truck sat parked at the edge of the lot. Its sign read, Miss Lottie's Kitchen Home Recipes, Honest Portions. Naomi smiled, her grandmother's name finally shining where everyone could see it. Her cousin manned the griddle, serving cornbread and catfish to a line that snaked down the block. Every plate sold funded scholarships for local students, an idea Naomi had pushed through with part of her settlement from the commission. As she walked back to her car, she spotted Sophia. The younger woman looked stronger now, more assured. "You were right," Sophia said softly. "It's not about one person winning. It's about all of us changing what we refuse to accept." Naomi squeezed her hand. "Exactly. And change doesn't happen overnight. But it does happen, piece by piece." She glanced up at the sky, hearing her grandmother's voice again. Meet it with proof. The proof wasn't just in files and signatures anymore. It was in children laughing on sidewalks, in families moving into homes they'd once been denied, in a community no longer afraid to speak out. Naomi opened her car door and looked back once more at the glow of the food truck lights. The system wasn't perfect. Maybe it never would be. But Maple Ford was different now, and so was she. Sometimes justice doesn't roar in with trumpets. Sometimes it shows up in steady voices, in people refusing to stay quiet, in the smell of cornbread drifting across a summer night. And Naomi knew one thing with certainty. Dignity, when backed by truth, had teeth sharp enough to bite through stone.